Starting on Monday, January 27th and going until Saturday, February 8th, the Rady Jewish Community Centre is putting on an incredibly fun festival that puts a highlight on Yiddish language and culture. Called Put A Yid On It, this festival celebrates the humor, warmth, and character of a culture that has been slowly lost over time. For those who are unfamiliar with what Yiddish is, you may be using Yiddish words without realizing it, many of these words making their way into the lexicon of the English language. Putz, Bagel, Bupkis, Chutzpah, and tuchus, and schmooze are all words that originally come from Yiddish amongst many, many others. Now in its sophomore year, the Put A Yid On It festival is sure to be a fun way of taking in some engaging, hilarious, and unique art. And you do not need to speak Yiddish to enjoy it. English is a perfectly kosher language to take in this incredible festival. And joining me here in the Classic 107 studio to talk about the second year of the Put A Yid On It festival, I am joined by Shira Newman, who is the coordinator of arts programming at the Rady JCC and the festival's producer. Hey, Shira, so great to have you here.
Hi, Chris. Thanks so much for having me here. And great intro. I really appreciate it. You bringing up all those words.
So the Put A Yid On It festival is now in its second year. How did the festival go last year? It's in its inaugural year last year.
It was great. It was, everything that I had hoped, in the many years that it took to plan that first year. It was what I had hoped it would be. I'd really dreamed of it having this being really playful, really inclusive, and just kind of soulful and also intergenerational, and it really came together in that way. So especially our big kind of wind up at the West End Cultural Centre with the hip hop artist, hip hop Yiddish singer, so-called, from Montreal, who just had this. We had a huge audience. It was kids and elders and everybody in between, and it was full and exciting, and people were on the dance floor the whole night, and at one point we were all doing the hora around the room. So it was really what I had hoped for.
That's excellent. For those who are unfamiliar with the Yiddish language, can you briefly describe what it is?
For sure. It's a combination of German and Hebrew. So it's written in the Hebrew text, but it will often sound a lot like German. And it's the language that was spoken for about 1,000 years by Eastern European Jews, kind of spread all over Eastern Europe, and then all the places that they ended up going, like England and Canada and Australia. It was at one point it was spoken by 11 million people. Actually, only 80 years ago it was spoken by 11 million people. So it's a language that's very, very special to us.
Absolutely. I know last year the Rady Center offered Yiddish classes, and those proved to be very successful. The Put A Yid On It festival last year, as you say, was very successful. Do you think that there's a real desire and interest in keeping the Yiddish language and culture alive, in particular here in Winnipeg?
Definitely. Yeah. And I think we weren't 100% sure if that was true. And that was something that the first festival was a bit of a test of. And it proved to be an interest that was out there. So there was a festival previous to this in Winnipeg called Mamaloshin, which was amazing. Tended to have an older audience and was strictly music and focused a little bit more on traditional stuff. So that was always there for that generation. And then to see that it is actually something that a lot of younger people are really engaged in and curious about and interested in is really was really fascinating. And there's this movement that gets called the Yiddish Renaissance, and you can really see that happening, that kind of taking hold all over the world, really. So we have festivals popping up everywhere.
We're going to talk about one of the documentaries that's going to be shown about that in just a bit. It's just great. I was looking at the festival lineup this year on the Rady JCC's website, and I dare say it's even better than last year's lineup. Opening the festival on the 27th is Schmaltz and Pepper. This is a show that's happening at the Bernie Theater. It's a great name for a band. I watched their promo video on the website. They are incredible. Can you talk about them a bit?
Yeah, for sure. They're a very new band, actually, in the Jewish music world, but they're all extremely seasoned musicians. So the clarinetist is the lead clarinetist in the Toronto Symphony Orchestra. We have one of the members was in the Jeff Healey band. Another is the lead singer in Peadora, which is a really popular Yiddish and Spanish tango band. They're like incredibly seasoned, mostly classical musicians. But they have all loved klezmer for a very long time and decided to kind of bring that all together into this like really fun, joyful celebration of all of their kind of Jewish identities. So they sing in both Yiddish and English. They do a lot of original writing and work.
And it's not only klezmer and Yiddish music, but one of the things I saw in the promo video is they infuse classical music done in a klezmer style too, which is really fantastic as well, right?
Oh, totally. Yeah, they have a song called Mozart Was a Mensch, I think it's called, that I really enjoyed a lot. They really do. Yeah, there's a huge sense of fusion and playfulness in their composition. And I think it's the kind of band that really would engage with a lot of people, whether they're specifically interested in klezmer or not.
One of the things about this festival that I found really interesting this year is the Yiddish influence, and it's influenced here in Winnipeg. On February the 2nd, you're having a conversation called Strike, Yiddishkeit and the Winnipeg General Strike. It's an absolute genius idea. Can you talk about the discussion a bit?
Yeah, for sure. So that's going to be a panel discussion with Harriet Zaidman and Paul Moist. Paul Moist is from CUPE. He was the president of CUPE. So very knowledgeable people about both the kind of labor movement in Manitoba, North End culture, kind of working class North End culture, as well as like Yiddish newspapers, which were very sort of prevalent in Winnipeg and read widely by the Jewish community. They're going to be talking about the way that Yiddish was really the language of working class Jews, and it was the language in which people were talking about these issues. They were talking about the ways that people were living, that working class people were not kind of being able to get living wages. We're not being able to get like safe housing. Basically
things we still talk about now, except in Yiddish. And one of the things that it really drove home for me was, a lot of North End Winnipeg, there was this whole Yiddish culture there at one point. I didn't even know that there was a Yiddish paper here in Winnipeg at one point.
Yeah, there was. And the, yeah, absolutely. It was a North End community at one point, and there was a Jewish library that was in the North End that had a lot of mostly Yiddish books at one point. There are all sorts of Yiddish speaking organizations.
There was the old Parrott School on Jefferson that taught Yiddish classes to children. So yeah.
And they're actually one of our sponsors, the Parrott Schools. They don't exist as a school anymore, but they still try to fund Yiddish language projects. And it's funny, I actually work with somebody. I always think of it as this thing from the distant past, but I actually work with somebody who's my age who went to elementary school at the Parrott School in Yiddish. So it's not that long ago.
Yeah, absolutely not. The other discussion that's taking place during the festival, it's happening on January the 30th. It's called Yiddish and Its Demons, How to Write in a Dying Language. Who is Professor Itai Zutra? I hope I'm saying that right. And what is that discussion going to cover?
So Professor Itai Zutra, we're so lucky to have him. He is originally from Israel, studied in New York, the Jewish Theological Seminary, I think, and is now a professor at the University of Manitoba in Judaic Studies. Yiddish, he's fluent in Yiddish. He's a Yiddish scholar, and he's really interested in Yiddish literature. So he's going to be talking about I.B. Singer, who he's much more knowledgeable than I am about this. But I.B. Singer did write. He wrote in Yiddish throughout his life, I believe, he never really made a full transition to writing in English. He was internationally known, and he won a Nobel Peace Prize, or not Nobel Peace Prize, a Nobel Prize for literature for his work in Yiddish, where he talked about how writing in Yiddish is like writing for ghosts that you expect to come back to life again. And he sort of talks about how Yiddish is he thinks about what would happen if sort of the people who died in the Holocaust or who lived before that came back to life, and they'd be looking around for stories to read in Yiddish, and he wanted to provide those for them. That's sort of how he frames it. Yeah. So it's just a very lyrical kind of way of looking at Yiddish literature and cinema, things like that. So I know Itai will be talking, Dr. Zutra will be talking about both literature and film and all sorts of things, and why we keep creating in it.
Yeah, absolutely. Speaking of film, I know you come from a filmmaking background, and there's some fantastic Yiddish films this year. They're going to be shown. How did you find these films, and can you talk about them? You've got The Jester on the 29th, Mamale on the 4th, and The Man Without a World on the 6th. Can you talk about those?
Yeah, for sure. I'll talk about Man Without a World first. This is the nice thing about there being all of these festivals that are sort of coming up throughout North America, is that I was able to reach out to one of the directors, the director of CLES Canada, or past director of CLES Canada, and ask him about silent films. And I was looking for silent films that could be played with music, thinking the silent film would come from the 1920s.
Right.
But then he hooked me up with these unbelievable musicians, Alicia Spiegel from the Klezmatics, who are very well known.
Toronto-based, I think. Yeah, they're incredible.
I think New York.
Yes, yeah, that's right.
Yeah, am I right? Okay,
yeah, that is right. Yeah, but they're amazing. Yeah, I've got a couple of their discs. They're great.
Yeah, they were kind of like the name in klezmer music. And then Donald Sosin, who's a silent piano composer and pianist, I looked at the films that they've done original scores for, and most of them were 1920s silent films. But this film, Man Without a World, was actually made in the 1990s in the style of the 1920s by a filmmaker who really believes that the way to immerse people in another historical period is to use the style and the technology of that period instead of doing like a costume drama. So she decided to use that style of the silent film to look at a shtetl in the late 1800s, a shtetl in Poland, and it's just like such a fascinating film. It's
so the movie is silent, but in the theater there's going to be 2 live musicians accompanying the film, right?
Yeah, exactly. With a fully live original score. It's super moving and soulful. It's beautiful,
amazing,
and funny.
And then how about The Jester and Mamale?
The Jester and Mamale are both more from the golden era of Yiddish cinema. And they I found both of those films through the National Center for Jewish Film, which is a really great organization who are super passionate and committed to restoring Yiddish cinema. So they do beautiful restorations, which we have, and then add new English subtitles that are sort of more accessible to a modern audience. And they're both super fun films. With Mamale specifically, last year we showed a film with the same actress, Molly Picon, who is considered like they call her the pixie queen of Yiddish film, and she is just tiny and adorable and charming and musical, and so she's in Mamala as well as having been in Yiddle with a Fiddle last year. So I just kind of want to keep following along with her.
And for our Classic 107 listeners, if you want to see the trailers to any of these films, go to classic107.com. I've embedded a direct link to the Put A Yid On It festival, and you can check out the trailers there. They're just fantastic. On February the 1st, you're showing a remarkable documentary called Yiddish Land. It's about contemporary artists and their use of Yiddish in new works. Can you talk about that documentary a bit?
Yeah, for sure. I was so excited to find that film because I find sometimes it's hard to explain to people what this whole thing is, this whole movement of younger artists who are really like reclaiming the language and reinventing in it and why they do it. And so this film really like dives deep into this community because it really is a community of artists that kind of work together and support each other. So it looks at there's this huge group of folks in Berlin actually that have kind of moved there, Jewish artists that have moved there and are working in Yiddish, and it really looks at some of those kind of superstars. So it includes Vorspiel, of course, and another punk Yiddish artist named Danny Kahn, who's really cool, and maybe we'll get him here one year. And Weimar Summer Festival, which is like kind of the epic, the biggest of the Yiddish festivals, and it's been going on for a really long time and kind of brings all these people together. And then it also looks at theater artists who are working in Yiddish, which is something I didn't really know about, and all of these different folks, and really brings it to life. And it really gets them to talk about why, like from their heart, why this means so much to them. Because I will tell you, choosing to sing in Yiddish is probably not a really commercial choice. So it's not the way to get to celebrity, but it means so much to the people who are doing it. And they're doing such beautiful things in it, such beautiful work in it. It's just it shows you how idealistic it is.
Yeah.
And it also, it shows you a little bit about how Yiddish artists have a tendency to be very progressive people. And it kind of touches on that a little bit. They tend to, along with that idealism, is a belief in, say, multiculturalism, is a belief in supporting, like, immigrants the same way that they feel Jewish immigrants needed to be supported.
Sense of inclusion there, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And it honestly gets me a little emotional when I watch it, because I think that's so important, especially right now.
Well, I was going to bring that up. It was made in 2024, and with what's happening, yes, it's even brought up in the documentary, the whole anti-Semitic and how it sort of really does help sort of tackle that, right?
It does, absolutely. And from the perspective of the importance of people connecting through community, like different groups of people connecting and fighting hate together, and having each other's backs. And I think that's a really powerful way of looking at the fight against anti-Semitism, and I really value that.
Yeah. So that's Yiddish Land, and it looks like a fantastic documentary. I'm looking forward to seeing it myself. And then finally, rounding out the festival, on February 8th at the West End Cultural Centre, you're welcoming to Winnipeg Vorspiel. And I got to say, when I was doing research for the interview, I fell down a Vorspiel rabbit hole. They are absolutely awesome. It's Yiddish language mixed with the sound of Jefferson Airplane and a singer who reminds me of Janis Joplin. This show is happening at the West End Cultural Centre on the 8th of February. It's a Saturday. What can you tell us about Vorspiel?
Oh man, I kind of can't believe that they're coming from the very beginning of like looking into the Yiddish Renaissance. I've discovered, I found out that they existed, went down a rabbit hole many years ago. And the fact that they're coming here is incredible. They're originally from Latvia. They've been together for 20 years, since they were very, very young, and are just people who love Yiddish language, care really deeply about Jewish music, really are immersed in that and have really studied and explored, and they, go to the festivals and they teach and they learn about that part. But they really wanted to visualize what a world would look like, what a musical world would look like if Yiddish had never been interrupted, if there could be, kids in garage bands singing Yiddish ballads, but with electric guitars, along with their violins, and with their long crazy hair, everything that goes along with that. So they really bring in they describe themselves as a Yiddish psychedelic rock band.
Yeah.
And they are, and also much more. They also bring in reggae and blues and all sorts of
And they're all
music.
killer musicians on top of it too. I mean, so it just adds to it. Oh, it's going to be fantastic.
Yeah.
Shira, this year's lineup for the Put A Yid On It festival looks amazing. One of sort of the through lines that I noticed about this year's programming is this idea of Yiddish still being used today to create art, and the fact that it's still current and relevant. Is that something that you had in mind when you put this year's festival together?
I don't know if I did absolutely intentionally, but as it came together, that was definitely pretty clear, I guess. I think it kind of just happened more organically. But once I think the final thing that I selected was Welcome to Yiddish Land, the film that kind of pulls it all together in that way. And then it was like, that's what this is all about.
It all sounds so fantastic. I'm planning on taking in some of the shows myself. All the best on this year's festival. It is going to be excellent. And thanks for taking the time to drop by and talk to me today, Shira. This has been great.
Thank you so much, Chris. I appreciate this great interview.
For our Classic 107 listeners, the Put A Yid On It festival runs from Monday, January 27th through to Saturday, February the 8th. For more details, visit radyjcc.com or go to classic107.com. I've embedded a direct link to the festival page in the article about the festival that is up there now. Shira, thanks again.
Thanks, Chris.